Morning, everyone.
We are live streaming now.
All right. See Commissioner Jones and Mr. Bartleman, Mr. Parker, I see his chair.
They go. Come back and get on this call. All right.
Everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right. All right, now we've got Commissioner Parker. And Mr. Parker, you hear us okay?
Gotcha.
All right, so Madam Clerk, I'll call this meeting to order, May 26th workshop, and then call the roll, please.
Commissioner Bartleman,
Here.
Commissioner Jones,
You're muted, Eddie.
Here. Sorry.
Commissioner Parker,
Here.
and Judge Clymer.
Here. All right, this is our final workshop, scheduled to be our final workshop. Hopefully it is. And I've been talking to Steve and Pam a little bit this morning, and we'll go through the numbers and address any concerns that we have, and hopefully we can have this done. So, if too little, turn it over to you and Pam to run through, present what you have.
Okay. Before we go forward, let's go backwards a little bit and remind you of a couple of key things that we track and are overall important to our budget. So how does that look? You should be able to see that pretty well. This is fund balance, and it shows audited the information taken from the audit. So we've discussed this one certainly a lot. That what it really demonstrates is that going back to 2012 through the last audit, which was the audit for last year. Our audit for this year won't start again until this sometime in the fall. Is that for a series of years, the county has spent more money than it has taken in. That's not necessarily always a bad thing. And some of those years there was a planned big capital expense. And certainly in the early years, they had big enough surpluses to take on big capital projects. It's really not an issue. But in the last several years, it's been more of a structural issue with the county taking in less money than it is spending, and that is a situation that we had really hoped would be 2020 would be the last year we would do that, and then in the fiscal year that starts July 1, we would begin the recovery. But with the COVID situation, a lot remains to be seen, whether or not that recovery will actually occur or will be pushed out another year or two. So when we put, as Commissioner Jones called it, the jigsaw puzzle together, there's a lot of assumptions about revenue that are difficult because our revenue numbers, we always base on historically what's happened, what's current, what do we collect the last 3 years. Because of COVID, that all gets thrown into doubt. So we closed right here with $2.7 million left, down from an all-time high of 7.2 million in funds. And we're going to have to get into that number again this year, I'm afraid. And part of the reason is because of this. Get rid of that. So we don't talk a lot about occupational taxes, but from a revenue source, it is one of the single biggest taxes we collect, and it is composed of two things. The collection of payroll taxes and the collection of net profit. Sometimes people call this the business license, but it's really the net profits tax. And we add those two things together. And as you can see, we typically produce $6.5 million has been the sort of average number. It's not getting bigger, hasn't been getting smaller, but it certainly is not a growing number. And through April, almost the end of April this year, we've collected 5.4 million, and that is down from the previous year significantly because of COVID, because collection deadline for this tax is ordinarily April 15th, and it's been kicked out now until July 15th. So some of our revenue that we would have ordinarily seen this year, we're not going to collect until next year. So we don't, because where all of this number, or most of this number is coming from the net profit side. These are net profits that happened in calendar year 2019. So this is not really a COVID related number in terms of the decline, other than a scheduled decline. The effect that we will see that happened to businesses in this county, we won't begin to see until next April, so April of 21. So we keep that in mind as we look at our numbers. And then some things you may have seen that are being pushed out by CAECO and other organizations are grants and different things to assist counties. One, you read a resolution on it last week. It's a Department of Justice grant that provided $58,000 for expenses. So we're turning that one in this week. We will pay for a number of things related to COVID. For example, probably one of the bigger costs will be the glass protection in the clerk's office. We'll use those funds to pay for that. But we're not incurring a lot of expenses related to COVID. We're buying supplies and cleaning. The harm that is coming McCracken County's way is going to be on the revenue side. So the 300 million the state is making available for counties, in order for that to be optimal for us, is there will have to be a change in legislation that will allow some of that assistance to cover revenue loss. With that being said, let's jump to that spreadsheet. So we talked about revenue before. Yeah, this is the updated one. And I've emailed these to you. Let's see if I can get just what comes into the general fund on one page. Okay. Let's start us here. Top line, property tax. That assumes the 4% rate over current year. If you want to change that, let me know. And here's where the big damage is coming, is in this line item, occupational taxes. We had budgeted last year for 6.2. We're a little short of that right now. We may make that budget. If we don't, it's because of the people that waited until July to file their net profits. And so we're taking a guesstimate that we're going to take a 20 to 25% hit in occupational taxes. So that represents the single biggest problem that we're facing on the revenue side that is known right now. And then insurance premium tax right here. I think the first number we showed you was a little over $1 million, a little under 1.1 million. We've revised that a little bit, but that one, goes in the category of we won't know until we know. And if we budget too low on that number, I'd rather make that mistake than budgeting too high and not realizing that number. But I think that number is still pretty conservative. And remember, that's going to only be for 3/4 of a year, just because of how the collection cycles work. And then everything else is about as we previously represented it, except for things that we were initially budgeting a more conservative number. We've re-looked at those and brought them closer to what current year has produced, and tried to think of those in terms of are these COVID related? Will we see something in there that will cause a decline in those? And when we saw those, and frankly, I don't think outside of occupational taxes and a couple other things, that shouldn't be too significant. One that is like that is, and I just shut that off, like this one. That's a pass through. I think surely that number will be down. We're showing it the same as last year, but I think with the slowdown in business coming into the airport, the car rental tax is something that will probably go down. Doesn't really affect the county budget so much because we just pass those dollars straight through. We don't keep any of that. So in the current year, we're budgeting 17,859, and for next year, not a significant increase, about $150,000, and that's mostly because even though we're going to get a bump from insurance premium, occupational taxes will be down. Road department, road fund, this category, starting right here, is also pretty straightforward because the big revenue numbers that come into this are gasoline tax. The state notifies us ahead of time what our expected allocation is going to be, and they've knocked some of those numbers down, also because of COVID, with people traveling and driving less. We think that's mostly occurring in the current year, but some of that decline will bleed over into the next fiscal year. So we should see, we budgeted last year 1.8, we're budgeting 2.2. The big significant difference is this. The assistance we got from the state to do Milton Drive for $497,000. Jail, I don't think we have changed that a bit. We had 4.2, almost 4.3. We're budgeting a little under 4.1 for next year. This has been a wild card one, not something we got a lot of in the past, and we're probably under budgeted on this one. It has to do with LGA has to do is mineral severance, and it has to do with coal handling activities that happen in McCracken County. All the grant stuff here is these are pass through. Sheriff fee budget for next year, $2.136 million. We budgeted $2 million last year. Looks like we'll hit budget for that. We have some miscellaneous things like Genova loan. Of course, we have reason to believe that they're going to the new company is going to pay that one off, and we'll be out of that one. Not much there. We did, of course, bump transient room taxes from 2.1 to 3.5, but of course that's all just straight pass through. The only thing we count on from that budget is the 2% money we keep for debt service. And we have some other revenues that come in for rents and leases. I think that one's Teletech. We got a little bit of interest, and then we get some outside sources. I think this is, Pam, namely City of Paducah on debt service payments.
Yeah, it's the City of Paducah, but it also has Murray State. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you add all that up, and then here becomes the balancer. How much of the prior year are we going to bring in from last year into this year's budget? And that remains a little bit unknown yet, but focus in on these numbers here of about 34 million needed to balance our budget. The problem is going to come is this number is too big. I'm just going to tell you right now, we won't have that much money to bring forward into the budget. So we're going to be a little off budget right now. Any questions about the revenue side?
How much of the revenue do you think is hurt by not having people out collecting the taxes and watching the payroll and the payroll taxes? I know we got rid of everybody. Does those numbers going down, do they correlate with when we got rid of the people that done that, or?
I gotta believe there's been some effect, because while we still have, we use building inspectors, Danny from code enforcement, to go in the field when we hear things. We were staffed differently at one point that allowed the tax administrator to spend a significant part of his work week out searching construction sites and other areas to make sure that people were paying their net profits tax. We do, I think, a better job now in terms of on the construction side, because you can't get a building permit unless all of the contractors and subcontractors on your list are current. So do I think we were affected by not having as much field staff time? I think yes. How much that number is, I don't know. Pam?
Well, I mean, that's not something, of course, that's just happened recently. The split between the treasurer and the tax administrator, that changed more than 10 years ago. So I don't know that anything recent has dropped our numbers dramatically. We do a lot of collections in-house. Yes, it's true, we don't go out in the field, but we do a lot phone calls and contacting of people.
We had, the previous administration had hired a company to search our tax rolls and find people that weren't paying and then take a commission if they located them. We're not going to do that in the future, basically because they didn't find very much at all. Of maybe what, Pam, a couple thousand a year it looked like, if that much.
Yeah, they didn't, there were a couple that they brought in, but there wasn't very much that they located.
Okay.
Steve, I've got a couple. Can you hear me?
Yes.
How much will the 4% increase in the property tax bring in? How much, the 4%, how much is that estimated?
Under $200,000.
Okay. Okay. And when do we receive payments on the occupation tax? Does that come in monthly or quarterly?
Quarterly. Well, it comes in every month, but they're due quarterly. So yes, we get late payments, but it's due. So the what am I trying to say? The payroll is due quarterly. The net profits is annually collected, but the fact is some money comes in every month on both of them.
Okay. And do you know of any major employers in the county who laid people off and we didn't get revenue? I know that the gaseous diffusion plant operated, the schools operated. They're our biggest employers in the county. Were there any really big employers that laid people off that we didn't get revenue from that you're aware of?
Not aware, not directly aware.
I think we lost some retail, I'm sure, in the Lone Oak area. And maybe some, but outside of Lone Oak, there's not a whole lot of retail. And did Teletech, did they continue to operate?
They did.
So we really didn't have any, we didn't have, the city takes a big portion of their income comes from retail, but ours comes from manufacturing and industrial. Is that a correct assessment?
That'd be a correct assessment.
So we may not have lost percentage-wise nearly as much as what the city lost.
The challenge, that's true. I expect they will probably lose more. Now, we do collect some occupational taxes from businesses in the city because it's not where your mailbox is. It's where the money was earned. Now, for the most part, they can take a credit on their business license and credit against what they have to pay us. But we do collect from some businesses in the city.
Right. I mean, that'd be like a heating repair person. If they do work in the county, they have to pay on the portion in the county.
Right.
Even if they're located in the city.
Some of those can be significant. They're located in the city, but all their work is, or significant parts of their work are outside the city.
Okay. if the new owners of Genova buy the plant, if they follow through in their perhaps desire to buy the plant, can we use that revenue to pay off the bond, or the bond restrictions, they have to go to the end?
I believe the call date on that was any time, so we can do, so there's about 4 years left on that note. We can just, and it was a general obligation, it wasn't like a mortgage. So we can just continue to pay it as we always have, or we can pay that note off, or we really have some flexibility with that. But
Is
that's
the same-
but it's not. That's going to be a one-time windfall.
But it would save us the amount of money we're paying every year on the bond. How much, do you remember how much that bond payment is on Genova?
I don't know offhand. I think it's around 190,000 a year.
So that would save the county about 90 to 100,000 a year if we were to pay that off.
No, that's our note. That's our.
And in addition to that, we had the loan on the equipment. Is that correct? And can that one be paid off too? Was that two separate loans?
They were separate loans.
Right.
Yes.
So we can pay that one off too.
Well, no, they're paying us off. We're not paying it off. They're paying us off.
Oh,
That
okay.
was,
So
that was money we loaned them.
so that's cash that we'll receive.
Yes.
And that was what, about 600,000 left on that?
I think about 680.
Okay, so we'll need to decide what we want to do with those funds
Yes.
when they pay that off. Okay. So conceivably, if the building is sold, we could immediately pay off the bond, and that would save us our half of the mortgage or the payment, the bond payment, which would be about $95,000 to $100,000. Is that correct?
No, I think our part was around 190.
Oh, our part was 190. That's not half of it.
That's our part.
Okay, so we'll save 190,000 on that. And then isn't the jail bond, won't that be paid off in January?
Correct.
Jail expansion. And
Yep.
and that was what, 60 or 70,000?
I don't have that one before me.
Okay,
Pam
Okay.
can maybe look it up quicker than I can.
okay.
It's like 25,000 a month on the jail.
Okay. So that's about 300,000 then.
Yes, and when we get to the appropriation side, we're budgeting those exact numbers we owe. That's all we have in the budget is enough to pay those.
Right. But I'm just looking in the future though, that we will not have those obligations. That is part of the reason why we lost our carryover every year is we had those high payments on bonds that there was no revenue for.
That is part of the problem, yes.
So that will alleviate part of that problem. Okay.
So, Steve, in the occupational tax budget, how did you get to what's the math to 4.6? Is this 75% or?
That's 75%. Yep.
Now, looks like so the information age part revenue sharing agreement expires in February of 2021. So we know that we're going to lose 4 months of the income from the information age park, irregardless of a virus or anything. That's just plain going to happen. Is that factored in, or is that just part of the 25%?
Part of the 25%.
How much revenue do we get from the info park? Do you know that?
300. I can answer that, but give me a minute. I think the total revenue from both parks is 350,000. Only one is expiring.
And what's the status of negotiations with the city over that?
You saw the letter I sent to everyone on the Teletech. I sent that letter 2 weeks ago. I have not received an acknowledgement that anyone has really read my letter. I assume all of you read it with deep interest.
And they read it with shallow interest, I'm sure.
Well, I'm not.
So whose responsibility is to negotiate that? Should we have the judge and maybe some commissioners, or is it Steve Doolittle or Steve Irwin, or do we need to make that a priority to get that taken care of? Even though we've got 7-8 months left to go on that. What's your suggestion, Steve?
Well, we have already been meeting. We've had a couple of meetings with the city. And there's another one scheduled, I don't know, and there's another one scheduled. So the meetings have already started.
Has there been any progress?
No.
They're kind of
I
like,
mean, they're open to talking about it.
So what do we do? What do we need to do to make some progress in that?
Well, we hope that they say yes.
I know
We're
go there.
we're talking to them and trying to provide reasoning for why the revenue sharing should go on, comparing and contrasting with other relationships that we have and that sort of thing. I think we're doing all we can do. We've got a good relationship with the city in general.
Okay.
What we have to offer them that would say, oh, that's why we need to continue the revenue sharing, other than our good relationship and us working together on many projects.
so the answer to your question, Bill, is the I-24 park revenue sharing agreement brings us $194,000 a year, and the information age part brings us $150,000. It's the information age part expires in this fiscal year. The I-24 park expires in the next fiscal year.
In the I-24 park, that's the location of Genova, right?
Correct.
Plus there's others there, I know, but that's where Genova's located, right?
Right.
Judge, do you feel confident we're going to get an agreement on that?
Well,
No, I can't say that I feel confident, but I feel confident we're going to do everything we can.
Last time.
Try to get it done.
I mean, my take on that is you have to be reasonable in your expectations. I mean, they're not going to give it to us just because. Well, they're not going to give. It's a revenue sharing agreement. It was 25 years ago.
Last time.
And they're not going to extend it without a quid pro quo. In fact, I think it would potentially. Well, if the shoe were on the other foot, we wouldn't extend it without a quid pro quo. So we're going to have to offer up something in order to get it extended. I guess my point is we just need to understand it expires and budget for the expiration. And in the process, if there is something that can be mutually offered that's beneficial to both the city and the county, then that'll be good news. However, with regard to one particular building, the Teletech building, that should be extended just simply because we own half of it. That's the letter I wrote. That's the letter that hadn't been responded to yet. but frankly, that's only 35,000.
Anything else on that?
Well, I think I said all that to say, I think your occupation tax number is going to go, certainly going to go down because of the virus and because of the expiration of those agreements.
On the occupation tax, we should take in more this year than what we have budgeted for next year, shouldn't we? Because we're already at the number. And we still have what, the last quarter to get payments on. So we'll have revenue in excess on the occupation tax than what's budgeted for next year. Is that correct, Steve?
No, I don't think so. What you're seeing is a delay. Taxes in this cell right here that we would have expected for net profits are being kicked over into July. And whatever layoffs and business downturns that occurred in this last quarter of this fiscal year, those are due in June or through June, but we don't collect it until the next fiscal year. So couple of key things that we're going to watch. And that's why when we got to the very first budget workshop, next year is going to be unlike any in recent memory, because I think we're going to be, our assumptions, some of them will prove right, some of them will prove wrong, and we're going to have to be nimble and adjust to them. Because in July, we will get the rest of the occupational taxes, but also in July, we'll see how much damage there was caused by COVID in our payroll tax collection. And that will cause us to re-examine this number right here. It may not be as severe, or it can be more severe. We're not going to know until we know. And the other thing that is going to change that, because of that delay for net profits into July, it can cause this number to not fully realize, but those dollars we should have expected this fiscal year will float into this year.
So the payroll tax, you're not anticipating any more revenue from the payroll tax? I know the occupation or the net profits will be delayed, but we don't have any money due in the next, between now and the end of June in the payroll tax?
Nope, that's a quarterly tax.
So we got everything we'll get by the end of, for the January through March quarter, we've already gotten all the payments for that.
Yeah, so the delta you see right here between these two numbers, $1.5 million-ish.
We're not seeing those numbers, Steve.
Oh, I'm not sharing. Oh. So the delta right here between what we budgeted and what we collected is primarily in the net profits. There's always late stuff coming in payroll, but that difference is mostly in the net profits. We did look at April. So this was reported through March. Through April, it was, hang on, this number was 5.6. So we're about 600,000 off. However, a chunk of that will show up in July in the next budget cycle, which will help soften the whatever losses because of COVID occurred right there.
So we've already taken in $1 million more than what's budgeted next year, but then again, we don't know what the COVID will have in the July to September.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. Gotcha.
Steve, what's the math of your insurance premium tax number?
So, the math is this. I looked at the, from our previous study, the comparable counties. I applied our tax rate to that, and then took 3/4 of the year.
I guess I will be interested in, I'd like to look at that math to, I assume it's a range.
It is.
And
And I concede it's conservative, but I would rather make the mistake on the low side than overshoot and overguess.
but from a Department of Local Government standpoint, if we were less conservative there and added 200,000 and took $200,000 off our property tax, if the commission, if the court was not inclined to give the 4%, that's a place we could fix it and hope we're right.
You could, but you won't know when you're going to be right for a year and a half.
I get it.
It's the challenge. My personal feeling is after we have a couple of years of collections, it'll be significantly better than that number. But we do know this for sure. In the next fiscal year, we'll only collect 3/4.
And then, you've talked about the challenge in trying to determine what revenue would be received from that, and doing comps with other counties of similar size, is that nobody taxed at the level that we did for each individual category. We didn't tax for what, one or two categories taxed variable or other rates at some of the others. And so the insurance people even tell us, and DLG tells us that you just don't know until you actually get the revenue what it is.
I also want to say I'm not personally committed yet to the 4% on the property tax. I want to see where we're at in, I guess, August or September when we set those taxes, or that may run late this year. I'm not saying I'm against it, but I'm not ready to commit to that yet personally.
Yeah, when do we have to make that decision, Steve?
So ordinarily, I'm going to ask Julie this. That's ordinarily like an October decision, but isn't the state has already altered the tax calendar, correct? I know I've seen that. They backed it up.
Right.
And will that cause tax bills to go out a month late this year?
I think so. From what I've seen, it looks like that, yeah, we're going to be extending that on out a month later.
So you'll actually send out the bill later, or they'll just have more time to pay?
Well, they'll have more time to pay. Yeah.
But they could
possibly go out at the same time, but
most of the escrow companies are probably going to want to pay for whatever, but they're going to want that 10% or 15% discount. So they're going to pay just as soon as they can pay.
Okay, so
Julie, are we going to have, how much savings are we going to have on the election this year? Obviously, with only one precinct open, but there's going to be a lot of other work involved, I know, but how much will we save on that for the primary?
yeah, I'm thinking it was, I mean, it's not going to be like a really huge amount. It's probably going to be maybe $60,000 or $70,000 as far as the precinct worker pay. And of course, we really don't know what we're going to be facing for November either. I mean, hopefully it'll be back to normal, but
Pam, just a small amount of money, but the Dakota Mineral Tax, that's the 41,000 that we got in 2020.
Yes.
That was an unexpected number.
Yes, in the past, we have gotten hardly any monies from that. But apparently there's some activity at I think it's the Triple Rail site, where they're doing something that's creating us getting those funds. But excuse me, that money is restricted to some degree.
Restricted in how we spend it?
Yes, we've never had enough to really matter, so I'll have to look at those rules, but it is restricted on how you can spend it.
That must be because they're moving coal from somewhere else in Kentucky up to that site and then using our rail to pass through.
I'm not sure.
I'd be interested in looking at how that's occurring, just to make sure we're capturing all of it. Unless you're confident we are.
Well, that comes from the state. The state is calculating that and sending that to us.
I don't trust them more than I trust anyone else.
Steve, I've got a question about the road fund. There's been some indication that there could have to be a special legislative session to cut back spending of the road money. Have you taken that into consideration? Because that's one area that's really going to be hit hard, was the state's income from gasoline tax.
Yes, so if you look at primarily these three numbers, here, let me highlight these. Those are the numbers we received from the state of which will be our allocation for next year. And those are down from current year already. And then some of it bleeds over into next year.
Were those numbers given to us before the virus or after?
These are the after virus numbers, correct, Pam?
Yes, that is correct.
Because it could be even worse than I was predicting from, again, I just read somewhere where they're going to have a special session to redo the road fund budget.
Yes, I've seen that as well. Now, however, those dollars we use most of these dollars for paving. So if for some reason we find out later that they are adjusting these numbers, we can adjust our appropriation side too. We're not going to spend more in paving than we actually receive.
And is the state, have they indicated that they're going to start sending state prisoners, increase the population again? But I mean, they're facing a huge deficit. Will they try to keep the numbers down in the county jails, or where do you think that's headed?
Have not heard any final number on that yet.
What did April look like?
For
line 4537, that income.
4537 contract with state prisoners.
Right. You were 2.3 million into March.
It was for that period, it was 2,597,000.
But 250,000 for April. 2 million, so 2.6.
2.6.
If you do that for 2 more months, David may get to 3.1.
Well, and the billing on that is, I don't think the months, Pam described that process. It's not a perfect, here were exactly the number of prisoners you had for February, and your check comes in March.
Yeah, there's a staff person at the jail that does that and sends that up to the state. But yeah, there's some adjustments that they make each month for different, like maybe the month before had an error or whatever. So there's some adjustments. So it's hard to pin down exactly how many people. It never really comes out exactly right. But it was like, I think it was that 247,000 last time, last month. 240 is what we got for the month of April in May. So that was, the month of April, that was a good example probably of state prisoners already being dismissed, I guess. May could be even lower.
I guess that's one of that scenario we need to be even more conservative in than what you are in the budget. I mean, I know some of our expenses might be lower, but
You're basically at 240,000 a month now already, I feel.
Yeah, I think that's the number I used.
That's exactly the number you use, yeah.
Yeah, if you take that number and divide by 12, 240.
Which is what we got in April.
Yeah.
But that is a good point. We've seen this happen in the past where the state has the ability to make budget decisions and they come out of reduced numbers of people incarcerated.
Well, just I don't know that it's a complete explanation, but our budget is going up from 30,600,000 to 34 million, but of that, almost 2 of that is the transient room tax, which comes with a statutory obligation to give that money over to the other agencies.
Correct.
So that, and I guess then the other increase is the insurance premium tax, the other part of that.
That's it. That's the bulk of it. Any other questions about revenues? And we'll jump to appropriations. And Judge, do we need a break or anything before we jump to appropriations?
Anybody need a break? Let's roll on. You do.
I do.
Oh, I didn't read the subtle inference.
Hint. Yeah, hint. I just
Okay,
need
all right.
I just need a minute.
Let's break for 10 minutes till 5 after.
Oh. Thank you.
All right, we ready to start back?
I'm ready.
All right, go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Let's,
Steve, could I say one thing before we leave revenue?
yes.
And I guess I just want to make a general comment. If we look at the line 4134, occupational tax, that's the number the county has been struggling with, and we're struggling with right now to predict. It has declined over the last 4 years, and we know it's going to continue to decline with the revenue sharing agreements expiring with the city. And I guess I want to take this opportunity to suggest that when folks are talking to their state representative or their state senator, Danny, Randy, and Steve, and Arlington, to encourage them. We have no power on this. Counties have no standing to object to city annexation. Cities have the upper hand, and the Supreme Court has gotten soft on the requirements of annexation. And there's been a significant movement or the county organizations to try and give counties standing to object or to harden up the standards for annexation. Frankfurt has yet to move on that. And I believe that that's something that needs to be picked up on by local folks and encourage our representatives in that regard.
That's been an issue which comes up every legislative session, but the municipal league seems to have more clout than others. I think it's something that needs to be done. And KCO doesn't want to get in a fight with municipal league over that. So I think we just have to probably look at KCO to get them behind it. In a lot of communities, it's not that big of an issue. It is for first and second and third class cities, but in those other counties, it's not a big issue that they want to get into that fight. They seem to want to make the cities happier than the counties. But I agree with you, that something needs to be done.
I agree also, but I also think that it looks like the numbers have declined going back for several years when we stopped having I guess a tax administrator or someone out beating the bushes. So I'm not sure that we don't want to look at possibly putting someone out in collections again.
That's Steve.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to work this a little bit backwards so you can understand where Pam and I are right now, and we can get your input on some basic solutions, because we do not have the appropriation quite in balance just yet. So we showed you a picture of 34 million in revenue, but and so we've gone to the appropriation side and have done the same thing. So that's 34,230,000 revenues equal expenses. However, a bit of a problem is, if you remember this from the revenue screen, this is the bottom piece of it, is that we were putting in 3.2 million from prior year surplus. We don't think prior year surplus is going to be quite that big. It's going to be probably no more than 2.7 or 2.8 million. So that means when we adjust that for the real number down, everything over on the appropriation side is going to have to be adjusted as well. So when we get down here to all these funds, when we make that little change to prior year, we're going to have to adjust this down a little bit. Okay, so keep that in mind, is that these numbers are not quite final. In order to get it to balance, we're going to have to take right now about $500,000 out of this budget. Even though we instructed all of the departments to keep everything flat, everything you see will be just that. But there still is, despite the strides that have been made in the budget to get it structurally balanced, there's still an imbalance. We still do not produce enough revenue to balance the budget. Okay, so probably, well, what you have not seen yet, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, are all of the, you saw the major departments. I don't think we did we do in all others before, Pam?
Yes.
Oh, we did. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to scroll through these then rather quickly. If you see something that you want to talk about, stop and talk, but we can click these off pretty quickly. The county judge budget, which is just basically me and the judge and Kara and Vicky, 3% increase, and that's all in primarily in COLA, and there's a little bit more in there for DULA, a little bit more than COLA. County attorney, you will see down 4.4%. That mostly came from, there was an overtime budget that wasn't really being used, and also tighter state management of the child support budget, including overtime in there. It was no need to really have that in there. That's not going to happen. So that's why you see that decline, small decline in the county attorneys. County clerk, very well managed department. They do not go over their budget. It is absolutely flat from last year to the coming year. Same with coroner's office. It's to the very dollar. There is no increase in the coroner's office. The fiscal court, what we call the fiscal court budget, it's maybe inaptly named because we pay for more than just the fiscal court. We have memberships and travel and training and also vehicles. That shows a minus 4%, a slight decline. Here are your statutory contribution to PVA. The finance office, the increase is based on the additional person we added for human resources. So that was virtually all of that increase comes because we added the one body in this prior year.
And that the CAECO memberships, are we still budgeting 2,000 for that?
They are not, because of COVID, they are not collecting a fee this year, a membership fee.
I guess
We pay CAECO still a lot of money because we buy the Kentucky all lines insurance funds.
oh, I'm sorry. I had my columns confused. Okay, now I got it. Oops, oopsie.
But you're right. We're not budgeting anything in this cell because they're not going to assess a membership fee for 21. But we're still going to pay them a lot of money because of insurance. Rolling on, this is another area that Julie manages. and that's elections. We do have, so you see a very flat representation. That's not good because we really do need to be buying more machines and replacing more voting machines. And this was the big prior number that Commissioner Bartleman was referring to, that because of COVID, we get a dividend here. Instead of there being 54 precincts open, there's only going to be 1 precinct open. So we should see a significant decline here. However, in the current year, however, we are going to have a general election this fall. So in all likelihood, we will spend that amount. Any question about elections?
Is there an election next year, or is that the off year?
Yeah, I was gonna add that we do not have any elections next year.
Is that,
Well, but that will just be part of the budget, like the election that we would normally have in May, the primary next year. Of course, that would fall under this budget. And then the general election that we would normally have next year in the fall, I guess that would fall in the next year's budget.
Right, because the next calendar year represents really 2 fiscal years.
Right.
A half of 2 different fiscal years.
is that taken into consideration the budget that we only have 1 election, Steve?
Yes. Planning, again, some of these, sorry for the rapid scrolling. It's called economic development, but includes a bunch of things, including planning commission, and the planning and zoning office.
Steve, let me interrupt you a minute. On the elections, you have an increase there of 1%, not a decrease. So I wonder if you're taking into consideration there's no May election. Or am I reading that wrong? Election totals, you have that increase by 1%.
Yes.
So shouldn't it be decreased because there's no election next year?
We're going to re-examine this number right here because of that lack of a primary next year. So we might be able to adjust this one down.
If I remember, I mean, in the past, we've saved about $200,000 over the cycle of the year when there's no election. It goes over 2 different years, but.
Yeah, because you not only save this, but the big advertising numbers that are in the budget, some of those things. I don't know, that sounds pretty big, like a pretty big number that you'd save that year.
It's not 1 fiscal year, it's 1 calendar year. Because there's no election in May and November, but that
Right, so
will be adjusted down.
yes, there'll be an adjustment in this cell right here.
Wouldn't have the printing cost either, I guess.
It wouldn't have the printing, half of the printing cost, right?
Good catch, Bill.
Yeah, that's a good one. Again, very flat. You got some COLAs only in those salaries. This line item here, program support, we have it highlighted. Keeping the airport on their budget subsidy flat for at least the 3rd straight year, that is unsustainable. The cash relief they get to balance their budget from the city and county, we're projecting to keep it flat, but that will become an issue eventually. We won't be able to do that.
If I remember correctly, about 2 or 3 years ago, the subsidy of the airport was about $130,000 because they had some bonds they're paying off. And to the airport's credit, they came to us, Richard Roof said, the bonds are paid off, we don't need that money anymore. And they allowed us to cut back on that amount of money rather than say we can use it for other purposes. I give them credit for doing that, but we're probably gonna have to go back up to some figure close to what we did. But again, they had some bonds that had paid off, and that allowed us to reduce the appropriation by 40 or 50,000, if I remember that number correctly.
Yes, but we're not even doing inflationary gains. And as the new terminal project comes into focus and new operations on their way out, I'm unsure how our budget will be affected in the future. Generally, it means it will cause some additional support, is my expectation.
I'm sure they're going to be hurt by the virus too, because of the reduction in flights and rentals and the fees they get. So
they have been hurt since mid-March.
of course, they got a significant amount of money from the government too.
Courthouse, that's just basically the janitorial and maintenance services. Again, that small increase is all in COLA. Did not propose to make any significant changes in that budget. Building and electric total from last year to this year. The significant change in this budget, I am recommending that we add a clerical position back that was previously removed. When you look at the combined offices of the building inspector and the road department, historically, that was 3 clerical positions. We have squeezed that down to a single person with a very good sense of humor. And it's really, frankly, too much for one person. We have been, we've had a part-time off and on in that office, but it really needs to be funded for a full-time secretary for that office. As a critical spot for developers and builders that we manage that competently. We only bring in $134,000 in fees, and perhaps we can look at fees to cover a fee increase to cover the new spot, but that one I think is important. And also, as we spoke before, I know you all get a lot of emails about code enforcement. We have 1 part-time person for 250 miles and a modest budget. This one we call property cleanup, $15,000, and another $15,000 for tearing down houses. And as you can see, we don't actually tear down a lot of houses. Most of the money we do spend is in property cleanup.
Is he able to keep up with the calls he gets? Whenever I've contacted him, he's usually reacting really quickly, but has he got a big backlog that gets him a week or 2 behind, or is he able to keep up with it part-time, or does he schedule his time to keep up?
He is one of those individuals that's just very efficient. But our system is not a systematic approach. It's a complaint driven. Where's the squeaky wheel today? And yes, I expect when somebody from the fiscal court calls, he makes that a priority. But it's really more than one part-time person can handle for the entire county.
We need to do something in that area too, because I know I've got some complaints about some stuff. I think it was in Hendron or Lone Oak area about some property, and contacted him. And a year ago, he had already cited those people, and they never followed. He wasn't able to follow through on it. Do we need to increase a budget so they can follow through on some of those things, or do we just get the ones we can? And
I think at some point we need to do a complete review of the program and look at not only how we approach cleanup, but how we might do it differently. and 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 that's going to take some time and some thought to decide how to do that. But yes, everything turns out to be resource allocation and how much resources can we put into it. I think, you know, it really ought to be a couple of full-time positions, and a much bigger budget for property cleanup and for demolition.
So we're actually being reactive and not proactive in that department because it's only part-time.
That has been our historical stance and position for probably at least 30 or 40 years, is one part-time person in a reactive kind of wait for the phone to ring and we'll respond to those complaints. And so, you know, sometimes I will hear a comment from the public, well, I know he drove by there. Well, yes, he did. He has eyes, but he was responding to some other complaint. If he stopped to work on everything he saw as he was driving around the county, it would be much more than one person could deal with.
So I've spoken with the county attorney. He's going to be looking at, there's probably some changes we need to do. As Steve said, the overall assessment of how we treat abandoned and dilapidated properties, unkept properties, unkept yards, that sort of thing. Our administrative code is, I think, lacking in that area. Our personnel, we have a good employee. He's part-time. People are wanting to build in areas, or people that have been living in an area for a long time. And then there's a house that catches fire. Bill, you got some experience in that area, I think, in your neighborhood from a few years ago. The house catches fire, whatever, the owner doesn't fix it, and then it costs the county money that we may or may not recoup to clean it up and put a lien on the property that you may or may not recover from that for many years. So it's something that requires an overall assessment, and I suspect once we crawl out of this financial hole that we're in, we can start looking at making some progress on helping to beautify it. And some of it's not just appearance, some of it is actually dangerous properties that need to be addressed.
That's good. I think a big problem is when we have absentee ownership. I know the one I talked to him about, the owners, it was a grandmother in a house who passed away or is in a nursing home, and the relatives live in another state and they just don't respond when he does something. So I think that's encouraging. And I think you're right. Once we move forward, if we can be proactive and enforce some of these things early in a property decline, it might prevent places from having to be torn down. So that's encouraging. And I agree, when we get out of this hole we're in, maybe we can do more about it.
Emergency management budget, 2 full-time employees. Most of what we buy is a lot of equipment and things for the department, and emergency management totally relies on the solid core volunteers that we have here.
Have we? Are you in the process of finding a new director? Isn't the current director retiring?
Current director, yes, I'm in denial about this. Jerome is highly effective and very good at what he does, and this is a critical job. And he keeps pushing his retirement date back. I don't know what his current one is. Of course, Jerome is retired once already. So that is something that will happen in this next budget year.
Can we fill that position with the salary we have in there now, or when we fill it, is it going to have to be higher?
I don't know. We'll find out at the time if we can even attract anybody at that number. My sense is that that is not a that salary is not real attractive to the market.
I know there's some other neighboring counties that have paid more than that.
Neighboring smaller counties pay more.
And he was just dedicated because he did that when he worked at the gaseous diffusion plant and just moved over and he has done a good job.
Yes, we're fortunate to find somebody who was semi-retired that could do the job as competently and effectively as he has, and not demand what is really low pay for that critical job, relative to when you look at how other not only neighboring counties, but what other first responders are paid in this county. Critical line item right here, 911. We plan to spend next year close to 800,000. No one should think by looking at that number that's what 911 costs. That is just our subsidy. So that's in addition to the landline and the cell phone and what the city of Paducah puts in. That's just our part of the subsidy of what landlines and cell phones don't cover and pay for.
Is that part of the contract we have with the city? Is that what it says we have to pay, or do they just send us a bill?
They just send us a bill. This is the city-run department.
Isn't there a agreement regarding how much we pay?
No,
Yeah, I was like, say, what contract? Do we have a contract, or we're just a customer, right?
we are a customer. Now, the city has never changed the funding formula from when we were a 50-50 partner. The funding formula has remained the same, but we don't get to decide how much the department spends. They decide.
So we spend half of what they decide.
No, not half. It's the net of what the landline fees and the cell phone fees pay for, minus there's some other small miscellaneous revenues. And then the required number that's left, we split based on call volume. So how much activity goes through the dispatch center. And I want to say the last time I looked hard at this, the city is about 55% and we're about 45%.
So that's an additional 500,000 in expenses from last year. And that's because last year we were hopeful that it was going to become its own entity, and it did not. And we are no longer hopeful that it's going to become its own entity in the next year.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that if nothing happens, if we don't change the system, we will pay roughly $780,000 as our part of the subsidy. We change the system sometime during the next fiscal year, that number will go down.
Do you know, Steve, if they take out expenses that are not 911 emergency related, like dispatching the flood wall people and the road, their street department, and do they subtract those expenses out? You know,
They don't dispatch out of public works out of 911.
I thought they had communication with them, like if they're going to go.
They have communication for them for emergency reasons, but the dispatchers don't dispatch those calls. They do that out of the office.
Okay.
So you're about, so if I took your 331 number of 425 and divide that by 9 and multiply that by 12, we would be 566. You've got 776. So
this number was provided to us by the city.
And that's just operating expenses. It's not equipment, right?
Operating.
Have you looked at their bill, their estimate to verify numbers in there?
Yeah, we do that every month.
So that's $200,000 increase. Guess I'd be interested in looking at that number and how they came to that number.
Pam, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just have, all I got was a 1-page where the projected total number was almost 2.5. And then they collect about 750,000 from landline and cell phones. And the difference is split up where the city's paying 38.2% and we're paying 31.3%. And that's where the 776 is coming from. And I'm going to guess that's based on call volume.
It is.
You send that to us?
Well,
Yes.
Okay. You would. Let's take a look at it when you get a chance.
I guess you have a file where they sent us what they wanted last year as well. I'm just wondering if we can compare.
I don't recall getting this last year. I think last year we were kind of going on just based on history, and it'd been about 5 to 550 what we were putting in. But then we cut it in half, thinking we were going to have something in place by January, a different revenue stream. But I may be wrong, but I don't recall seeing this last year, but I'll look for it.
If you have that, share it with us.
Yeah.
Yes,
Something
I
to-
will.
I will reiterate, you are a customer.
Yes, but I don't want to be taken advantage of as a customer. And
Again, I thought we did a written agreement a couple of years ago with them on when we couldn't, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just thinking that the old agreement we had expired and then we just became, send us a bill and we'll pay it.
That is the case, though they have not changed the funding formula, but they could have made decisions on the expense side. And I know they did add a new CAD system, and that created some new costs that we didn't previously have.
well, I guess that would be my point is if we're being treated as an equity partner on the expense side, and with an additional $200,000, I got to question whether we are, then maybe we don't need to be just a customer. If we're going into this with this level of commitment, then maybe we should be in an equity position as opposed to just a customer position.
Would it be?
Well, that's where we were. That's where we were. We were partners back. I don't know when that ended. Steve, you may know. We were a partner, and so we had input and decision making on all these things. And it was decided to no longer partner and become a customer. So,
County terminated the agreement something like 6-7 years ago.
Would it be appropriate, Steve, to ask them for an accounting as to how they came up with that figure? A detailed accounting, not just a summary?
Yes, we can ask for that. That's reasonable.
I think again, one of us could do that, but I think it'd be better if you did it on behalf of all of us.
I think the way to look at it is just, and we're trying to get back to the point of us being a partner, so that it's the city and the county going through this. And obviously, there is one supplier, and it's the city, and we're a customer. It's the city and the county, and we're the only other customer, really. And so we don't have a lot of, well, I mean, we've got goodwill and work again to work with the city and the relationship, but it's a matter of us being a customer for a service that only one provider provides. And it's not like we're able to go somewhere else and
Oh.
get that done.
Steve, is there still a 911 board or was that eliminated also?
It was eliminated.
I remember one of the big issues we had, there were some personnel issues that were difficult to deal with in the way the old agreement was, and that's why it became a city agency rather than one run by a board. There's personnel and management issues, I think, that, if I recall, had to be dealt with, which caused the demise of the board run operation. You remember any of that, Steve, or
Yeah, I remember it well.
was that the case? There were personnel issues that kind of led to this?
I don't know if it was that as much as there was an opportunity at the time to go to state police. And this was 2 fiscal courts ago. There was an opportunity, the state police made a presentation at a joint meeting. The fiscal court indicated great interest in it because it appeared to be saving about $80,000 a year. And the city dismissed the proposal because there were changes and cuts in the way the service would occur, and they didn't think it was worth it to them. So I think that's what really precipitated the county deciding to let the agreement expire and not renew it. Is there was some expectation that never came about that we were going to do dispatch through the state police. And then I think the next fiscal court came in, and I think quite correctly realized that that there was both loss of control, a diminution of service, and the long-term savings could not be guaranteed. And so they made the decision to stay with the local service. However, did not memorialize that with an interlocal agreement.
Well, yeah, we just got a substantial increase in what they're asking us to pay. Another $200,000 a year. I think we've got to ask about that and decide whether that's the continued route. We just can't treat them like the cable company. I mean, they don't get to charge whatever they want to. There are other providers. Surely there's just another way other than just, what if they do this again next year?
Well, we've been having meetings about doing rejoining as partners, and it's going to get done. This virus kind of kicked us in the head on a lot of things. And, I guess I blame it on the virus and about, I don't know, 3 dozen other matters that interfered with getting on that. But we were on time charging ahead, and we need to get back on track with that.
We keep talking $10 or $15 million investment in 911 and somewhere down the road, that would be as an equity partner, correct?
Yes.
Well, that's in new equipment, but I mean, if I'm understanding what they're saying is that essentially the operating cost is about $2 million. They take the landline fees, the cell phone fees, and then they take the difference and divide it out by call usage. And that's exactly how a partnership works. So, I mean, it sounds to me like we're already paying as though there's partnership. I guess we arguably just don't own the equipment.
Well, and you don't right now have a say in how big the operation should be or what equipment should be bought.
or apparently we don't have a say in how much our increase is going to be.
Well, I mean, that's, again, we were partners. We did have say, we did have equity. We decided back a few years ago to become a customer and not a partner. And so if we were partners with a local car supplier, we'd have to, say in what the price of the vehicle would be, but we're just a customer. But so that's, I think, the theory on why it's one of the reasons why we want to get back in. We talk about it all the time. Our number one priority is to take care of people, and dispatch is a big part of that. And so we are, not that I think they're doing a good job in dispatch and criticizing that, but it is one thing to be a customer and dispatch, and another to be a partner, and it can we have some skin in the game, we have some say, and through a board, through county input, we can adjust what we need, along with what the city needs. We have a better program.
Well, and I'm not trying to make this longer than it needs to be, but in our revenue, we're including a 4% property tax. That's about $200,000. Last year, we decided not to do the ad valorem 911 tax because we realized that was going to cut into our 4%. And I'm just wondering if this isn't a piece of the puzzle of how we get to where we want to get, is that we agree, rather than do this separate 911 tax, we allocate, all right, the 4% increase. Instead of doing a 911 tax, we're going to do the 4% tax becomes the 911 tax, and that then becomes its own entity, and we continue to fund it as opposed to fund the general budget. Does that make sense?
There's a significant delta between what 4% generates and what is required for 911.
Yeah, we can't. It would be us making a commitment, and I, as a property tax owner, would appreciate that commitment. All right, I'm going to have to pay more taxes. I don't like this, but you've been talking about 911 for 10 years. We've got to have its own entity. I would rather know that that's going to cure that ill and that sickness, that problem in the budget, as opposed to just going to the general revenue. But it's a long sell, but from the folks that are studying it, I think I'd like it better if I were the taxpayer.
We can incorporate that thought in how we go about funding the thing. And it's good conversation to have, but I think we need to do that at a separate time.
And I agree. It's a more complicated conversation. The problem is that once we take the 4% in our general budget, it's kind of like, well, now we can't have that conversation because we've already taken the 4%. But
can we go back to some of these other outside agencies like state police and reprice our 911 to make sure we get the best bang for a dollar?
I suppose we could. What is very dated now in their proposal required the county to make, at the time, what was about $1 million building addition, and then save 80,000. So after you paid for the building addition, then is when the savings would start, except for in their proposal, they only made a 3-year proposal. So, and would not predict what years 4, 5, and 6 would look like. Would they be inflationary? Would they be 5%, 10% increases? They said they could not answer that. I think it was really for those reasons the fiscal court finally decided that, at least at that time, that this doesn't work for us either, and we were better off staying with being a customer of the city.
Jeff, one of the issues in that, I did a lot of work on that over the last, or 3 or 4 years ago. One of the issues was we had an administration of the local state police post, at least one administrator over there, who was excited about trying to set this up. Once he left, I'm not sure the excitement lasted. I think before we go back to the state police, there needs to be some action by the state legislature, maybe to set up a statewide 911 system, maybe geared with the state police post, to make sure it's a long-term commitment. But part of the problem was we could have a 4-year commitment. At the end of 4 years, there could be a new administration in, new leadership in state police, and they say, we don't want to do that anymore. You've got 6 months to go find somebody else. So I think until the state legislature takes action to create a statewide 911 network that may be geared to the state police post, and there was even some discussion that the 911 dispatch should be even separate from the state police, that they stand alone and have their own providing dispatch for everybody. Because if a problem arises, then there could be, if the state police run it, there might be political difficulty in dealing with some communities. So I just think there needs to be legislation to create that statewide network, I think, before we get too serious with it. I think that makes sense. I went to a conference, and I think it was the state of Maryland or Delaware, I don't remember which, where they did that. And then the state put a fee on cell phones. They pretty well paid the capital costs, and then the communities can adopt their own cell phone fee to pay share the operating costs. So I think something needs to be done on that to modernize that and try to dilute the lobbying power of cell phone companies.
I'll tell you, I've been working with the city and having the conversations back and forth about 911. That's what's been currently going on. As you know, I worked 9 years in law enforcement here in this community, 1 year in the county and 6 in or 8 in the city. And so we've got an outstanding sheriff's department that handles all the law enforcement in the county. I think we've got an outstanding city police department that handles within the city, and nothing else. It would make no sense from my perspective, and having been in the game, to hand dispatch over to the state police or hand much of anything else over to the state when we're handling it ourselves and doing an outstanding job. So I think that we move beyond that question with the state and with our relationship with the city. We're going to get there on this 911, and it's going to be something that works very well. And I think that as economically as we can, still provide strong service, strong communication, strong coverage throughout the county and the city. Anything else on that? And move on. Let's go.
All right. Hate to talk about the city again, but we split animal control with the city, again based on call volume. I did highlight this number, Humane Society, because we have a expired agreement and a decision needs to be made about how to go forward. They have already indicated they would like an increase to that number and a reduction in service as it relates to emergency vet care. We have 2 full-time employees that are doing a very good job under difficult circumstances. We used to have three full-time employees in that department. Landfill is another shared thing we do with the city of Paducah. and there's minimal costs related to mowing and testing of water and paying for utilities out there. Litter abatement we do with grants. We typically do not even spend all the money. We send a little bit of it back. I think we're still looking into this one. Pam pulled the statute. Still not entirely sure where that 30,000 comes from, other than they are required to submit a budget to the fiscal court. And of course, Wayne Elliott will be appearing before you on, I think, June 8th.
Steve, can we go back to the animal control for a minute?
Yep.
Have they ever given us an accounting of the direct costs that they have in providing us with the services that we receive?
There's no requirement in the agreement that I recall that would require them to do that.
Can we ask them for that? I mean, it seems to me, if they can show us that we brought in 25 animals that needed emergency vet care and the expenses involved in that, again, direct and what expenses they have that we wouldn't have the agreement. Can we ask them for that?
Can ask them for it. I'm not sure what you're asking though. That for them to prove that there's how they're using our fee, or just limited to the vet?
Is it costing them $217,000 a year to provide services for the county? Or are we subsidizing their other work that they do? I mean, do they have vet costs and food costs and personnel costs that are directly impacted by the county? As I recall, we've only have 4 or 5 cages to put county animals in. Is that right?
We have 4 kennels that are allocated for us. We frequently go beyond that number when they have space. And in the agreement, we gave them sole control over deciding how many county animals can come into the shelter.
Do we, is there any renegotiations of what they provide to us?
We have only had 1 meeting with them so far. There will be more.
So there's another situation where they're the only provider in town. It's the Humane Society. If we're going to maintain, believe me, I've had the thoughts of what's our option. Do we want to go into the animal control business ourselves, build our own shelters, do all that? I have been warned by a person directly sitting there talking to us, Mr. Doolittle, his experience in this area, that we don't want to get into that business with Humane Society or with maintaining animals and picking up animals. Of course, we pick up a number, but I guess the bottom line is Humane Society provides the service. We contract with them. We can, and of course, we're a big provider of funding to them. They get a lot of money, I think, from donations and from requests from people who pass away and that sort of thing. It's very possible that we say, hey, can you show us why you need the money that you're asking for? Perhaps they provide us some of that. But it's a contract basis, and they're the only provider. So options are somewhat limited.
Are we on a month-to-month now?
Yes. At the same rate.
The limitations we have on that, it's difficult for us to enforce and deal with stray dogs that aren't in distress. I mean, we've all gotten phone calls regarding stray dogs, and they're always told there's nothing can be done about it. But we're got a big urban area in the city and subdivisions and all where can be a problem. It's not like a stray dog running on at a 20-acre farm, and somehow we need to find a way to deal with that. That's probably the biggest complaint I get that's not responded to because we don't have space to deal with them.
But overall, when the county made this decision 4 years ago, I still contend it was a good decision because it was running its own shelter, and which was not compliant with the state statute for shelters, was doing it with primarily volunteer help, and was still spending $350,000 a year. So when they made the decision, I think correctly, and the fiscal court took a lot of heat for that decision, it was good financially, or it was a positive financial step when that was done. I don't think it would be practical to think, even for the increased capacity and service issues, that we would spend $500,000 or more a year on shelter operations. We don't even have a building for it. We'd have to build something. So despite some of the service issues, it still, we're better off financially continuing to do this. I think there's just, it comes down to some terms and some additional capacity would make it a lot better and keep it cost effective.
I stop out there quite a bit. I mean, and she's very accommodating. Those 4 spots, we usually have a lot more than 4 in there. Those 4 spots just for emergencies, or that they have to leave open, or, I mean, if you go through there, she can name them off where they're from, and there's always a lot more than 4 dogs out of the county.
Yeah. I agree with you, Steve. It was the right decision, and one we ought to keep with. But some counties have actually gone bigger with the Humane Society, and in that, because we have a statutory duty to provide this service. And some counties have actually contracted with the Humane Society to provide the entire animal control service, to include their animal control director. Have we given that any thought?
So I've had a couple of conversations with Terry about that. At one time, she thought she wanted to do that. Her latest feeling is she is not interested in doing the animal control part. She just wants to do the sheltering.
Well, that answers that.
Okay. Yeah, at one time they were, because I talked to the chairman of their board, and he said they would be excited to do that, but I hadn't said anything in the last year or so. Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep trucking along here. I want to point out these 2, Carson Park, and then these are the rest of the park's budget. So when you add this number together and this number together, that's our total expenditure for parks for the entire year. So we're doing everything for something under 400,000. It employs 1 full-time person, that's Tony, and 1 seasonal person. We do not expend a lot of funds towards county parks.
How's the rental going on the Reedland and Heath facilities? Are they used very often?
Well, up until COVID happened, Reedland it's a nice facility. It's very well used. In the last few years, the county made a number of improvements at Heath, and it remains a low performer in terms of rentals. We don't get a lot.
How are the fees on that? Are we recovering costs in the fees we collect?
Yes. Reedland, we don't have a lot into that, primarily utilities. it had a fire when the Lions Club owned it, and the fiscal court took it over, and with them Senator Leeper's assistance, we got some state assistance to make all the repairs to the building, and that's how we got into owning that one. It's a nice little building. We do pretty well on rentals on it. I'm absolutely unsure how or why the building at Heath, how we came into acquiring that. That was a number of decades ago. But it's a nice little building, and it's available for rentals. We have not been doing any rentals because of COVID, but we do have some things on the books for later this summer, early this fall. This is the pass-through we give for the collection of car rental taxes, and we don't give the budget amount, we give the actual collection amount. There's some reason to believe this one is COVID affected as well. These are a bunch of miscellaneous things, including this whole area where you decided at your last minute or last meeting how we were going to make those distributions. This whole section has to do with primarily with our insurances that we go to Keiko for.
So on the line 348, the property taxes paid to the city. I think we discussed last time that was that's Teletech building.
That's exactly Teletech. Yep.
Right. So as we discussed earlier, the revenue sharing agreement expires in February of 2021, which is a potential sore spot of many areas. Like Judge Clymer says, we're working together on that, but that's a potential sore spot. Does the 19,000, does the agreement on property tax, does that expire at the same time, or is that a separate agreement?
That would be a separate issue and not subject to agreement. That had to do with when the Teletech property was developed. As a comparison to the Genova building, we co-own. The tenant always paid the property taxes. In the Teletech deal, there was no requirement for Teletech to pay property taxes. So it fell on the property owners, the city and county, and they're approximately $36,000 to $38,000, and we have been splitting that 50-50.
So that obligation is an obligation that we're required to do as long as we're an owner.
An owner and for non-governmental use.
Right. So which is exactly what we're proposing, that the revenue sharing agreement should also be for as long as we're an owner, but right now it's not.
That is correct.
Maybe someone's listening and will pick up on that small little issue that's going to irritate me until it's resolved.
To add to your irritation, of course, county taxes are like 26 cents per hundred and ours are 10 per hundred. So we end up paying, the city gets a little bit more money out of that than we do, because their taxes and our taxes are in that $38,000.
And that's another one of those agreements. I mean, they should have paid their taxes and we should have paid our taxes. So it's another one of those things that I don't need to say anything more.
Okay,
That gets us pretty much through the general fund. The 9% increase, tracks heavily to the 911 expense. Yep. From a budgetary standpoint, though, the general fund has performed well this year. We're not over budget. We're tracking well on that. move on to the road fund. The increase you see associated with the road fund, that's all Milton Road, the 497,000 we got from the state. Everything else remains flat, and the biggest expenses you see for road construction come from are paid for by gasoline tax. This might be a number, we don't have to spend that all on paving. This may come down to a number that we have to use for balancing, like we did last year, where we reduced the amount of blacktop. That is obviously an unsustainable strategy to chip away at paving, but might come down to that again this year.
Did you say that's the state money we get, or is that general fund money?
That is the state money we get.
So
from
we're
the
estimating
gasoline tax.
1.3 million from the state this year.
Yep.
So if we only get $1 million, we can easily reduce that if we have to.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. We don't spend more than the assistance we get for that. So, but for Belton Avenue, this one would remain flat, if not a little bit down.
Paving 400,000, so that's half of it, and then Milton's Avenue is the other half, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Milton is 497, and then that still leaves an increase of 600,000, but 400 of that is from the paving, right?
Right. More than 400, 350, 450.
Steve, on line 311, the road construction line. So we budgeted 900,000 last year. We've only spent 41,000. Are we?
Yep. We're paving right now.
So we anticipate we've got
Sure.
contracts out. We're going to spend that, right?
That will be spent. Yep. So I asked Randy traditionally we had done our paving in the fall, given the tightness, the expected tightness of cash flow, asked him to shift that cycle into the spring. So we're paving right now.
Gotcha.
Any other questions about road department? Very well managed in terms of budget in that department. Jail. Let me skip to the end, and then we can work our way back. You'll see the 5% increase comes primarily from the 2.3 increase on salaries, and also the jail locks project, which was going to be half this year, half next year, because of COVID and not letting outside contractors into the jail. The project's getting kicked all into next year.
Is there any grant money available to finish the locks project? I think I ask that every year, and I would think that would be a good target for a justice grant.
I never see those kind of funds available where they talk about eligibility for construction in jails. You do occasionally see people get, line item assistance in the budget, but not grants. I have not seen a grant yet for something like that, because it's old, wore out equipment that has to be replaced. Hopefully it'll be as good as the old stuff, and it will last us 30 years. This jail was built in the early 1990s, early to mid 90s.
We use commissary funds for that. I think we did a couple of years ago on part of it.
Yeah. That was the influence that Leaper had over Tanya.
I have no idea how much commissary money they have. I don't know.
They had about 60,000 last year. They bought some vehicles.
We are getting a bit of a COVID dividend. There are, some of the consumables like medical and food and some of the other stuff we buy to run the jail that has been down a little bit. That certainly helps with the overall budget this year. That's being saved right now. Any other questions about jail?
I know we can't budget this, but there's some indication or some hopefulness that early next year there'll be money available, or early next fiscal year, there'll be money available to make up for lost revenue from COVID. I know we can't budget that because it's uncertain until it's done and the formula they come up with, but there just seems to be some confidence now from comments from the Senate leadership and from NACO and CACO that there could be some money available to help with that. But again, we don't know how much it would be. If it'll be until the ink is dry, we can't deal with that.
Yeah, I would hope that would have been answered by now, but we are not budgeting or counting on anything at this point. That's why as we head into the next fiscal year, this budget will probably look very much different after 6 months than it does on July 1 because of issues like that.
It's disappointing the strings they had attached to the 200 million that they allocated to local governments, because there's an indication that they probably won't find reason to spend more than, if they can find purposes for 10 million, they're lucky, because the strings attached to that are really, they're not helpful. You have to document that you bought masks, or so I hope they do change that. Maybe they can change the formula for that, and the state has no control over it. It's the federal government, but maybe the feds will come up with something to free up some of that $200 million. And I think if I remember right, McCracken County is eligible for 2 million, but because of the requirements, there's very little that we can collect on that. Is that right, Steve?
That's right. Because of the CARES Act, it was directed towards expenses. And so we were one of the few counties that had a Department of Justice grant to assist us with COVID. And that grant was for $58,000. And, we didn't waste money, but we had to scrounge up everything we had spent from, right down to hand sanitizer to get that $58,000. Our problem has not been on the expense side in responding to COVID. It's primarily on the revenue side.
Hopefully they change that, but who knows?
Hopefully there's some reason to be optimistic they will, because that could be like 2.2 million for McCracken County. If that change were to occur, or even up half of that amount, that would be tremendously useful to us.
NACO call I was involved in last week, they seem to indicate that that some of the Senate leadership may readjust the definition of those funds, because there's so much that can't be used, that they may redefine what those funds can be used for rather than have another big pot of money. So we'll just have to see what happens. But that was what, 300 million or 200 million in Kentucky they had allocated, but very little.
300 million.
300, very little can be used. I think the governor allocated 250 million for counties of that, but again, just very little use for that. So.
Moving on to the Sheriff's Department. Again, the only changes are coming from how salaries are affected by their pay table and by COLA. The only addition to the budget is vehicles. We had traditionally done those out of the general fund. I think in order to get a more accurate reflection as to what the department costs, we ought to be budgeting the vehicles in that department. So if you took this 180,000 out, I don't think it would I'm sorry, it would only make it a 3.7% increase, and that was primarily in salaries. So a well-managed budget, well-managed department, but no significant increases, no money for additional deputies, no money for significant realignment of the salary structure.
Steve, what do they do with the vehicles they take out of service? I know they're not worth much. Do they just save those and sell them at auction, or is there some?
That's exactly what happens is when every ounce of life is squeezed out of them, they go to the boneyard and wait for an auction that happens every 2-3 years.
I know we have in the past sold a few of them for small amounts of money to other departments that needed backup vehicles or that didn't drive as much as ours did. And I think in the past, we've also given some to the school system for their police work.
Haven't seen that come up in the last 18 months where we've given anything away. The sheriff mentioned in his budget session with us that he is going to continue using his drug fund to purchase at least one vehicle a year for the department as well. That helps out. We had, Matt told me 16 cruisers with more than 80,000 miles on them.
Steve, are these SUVs holding up a little bit better than the other cars they had, or the SUVs doing pretty good?
The Chargers turned out to be very, we tend to have a lot of repair costs associated with the Chargers. I don't think we've had enough of the SUVs, primarily the Durangos and the Ford Explorers in service long enough to really know one way or the other. Yes, we do spend money on juvenile detention. No, we haven't spent any money this year. That doesn't mean we haven't incurred some costs. We're expecting a bill will come in before the end of the year. That will be somewhere between these two numbers. The next little section down has to do with, this is all the transient room taxes. Despite the numbers we have plugged in, it's all pass-throughs. We're only going to pass through what we actually collect. Of course, we've seen some of this might be business data I can't share, but we've seen significant drops in occupancy the last 2 months. You can see it in the collections. We're collecting less transient room tax. That affects these folks, but only on the cash that we just pass through them. So even though we put in the budget that the CVB is going to get $1,058,600, if we don't collect that, they don't get that. The one that we do pay attention to is debt service because we have bonds tied to transient room tax.
Is there any surplus in that fund right now, in the bond fund?
There's a little bit of surplus right here.
I'm just worried that if it comes up short, do we have enough money in that fund to pay the losses we have over about a 3 or 4 month period?
So this one, we were over generating by a small amount annually. I think it was between $35,000 and $45,000 that had been accumulating in that fund above what we were at a higher rate than we were spending out. And this bond has, I think, until 2025 or 2024 before it goes out. So, and it has, for the last 20 years, has been completely supported by transient room tax. There is an interlocal agreement that speaks to if the room tax doesn't generate enough money, the city, the county, and the CVB split the difference. And on the very first year, that amount maxed out at $85,000 was the overage.
Are there any of these bonds that we need to look at renegotiating from an interest rate?
So many of them, the call dates were moved out, so you couldn't refinance them. So let me show you what I mean. Pam has a more current one, but I can find mine more quickly. These call dates out here are not callable. You can't refinance them.
So
Steve, can you email us that document after the meeting?
Yes. This one has,
that's the big one.
that's the big one. This one's been refied once already.
I'm sorry, that's paid, that debt's paid by the 2%.
Transient room tax, yes.
Okay. And the next one's paid by the 2%.
This one is. There's another one.
So if it says call date 2020, does that mean we can refinance?
Yes.
So we could potentially look at the $4 million to the jail.
No, you wouldn't want to do that because it matures this year.
Oh, it's the one that goes away. I'm sorry.
It
Okay.
goes away, yeah. So same with the 2010B Convention Center. No need to refi that one. We get rid of these two this year.
So the big one's the Murray, and we could potentially refinance the Murray loan in 2021.
Yes. Or past that date. This one is the one that, of course, we hope is going away. This one is not callable at all. Teletech after 2023, Whitehall after 2023. And the energy savings one does not have a call date because it was more of a traditional, it's a geo lease. So I'm not sure about that one. We'll get this. I'm sure Pam might even have the FY 2021 ones we can plug in.
Okay. Thank you.
If you could send us that, I'd appreciate it, Steve.
Okay, we'll get it. Make sure you get the most up-to-date one. I'll bring your attention all the way. If it would stop rolling. It does that when we're on YouTube for some reason. and Pam just emailed it to me, is $34 million budget, and that is balances with the revenue, except for we know the revenue brings forward in an all-in position everything we have left in surplus revenue. So between now and when we introduce this, we're going to have to chip at least 500,000 out of it. And that's where the jigsaw puzzle is today.
Well, I'd like to thank the clerk and jailer and the sheriff and the road department for not being too hard on us.
All three have been, in my opinion, very well managed in terms of staying inside their limits and doing what they can to save money and be effective with the money that they do have.
So I want to redirect this in too much of a off-topic conversation, but SB 5, Senate Bill 5 said that we'll have some approval or disapproval authority over some special district taxation. And I'm curious how that will, this is the first year for that. How's that process going to work? In that, when will we know? Will it be the same type of format we had last year where they kind of show up and they tell us and we either vote yay or nay, or is there going to be a little more due diligence since we actually have to make a decision?
I don't know. I think that's all yet to be determined. There is something called the property tax calendar that says when the assessments are due and when things get delivered to the clerk, and then the state, for all of those districts, including us, they perform the calculations as to what the compensating rate is, what the 4% rate is, and I suppose it will be. I don't know how that's going to play out. You could ask them to present budgets to you, but for many of them, like us, they have their pictures are more complicated. They don't rely just on property tax. They have other revenues that come into their coffers. So look at it from a budget standpoint, or just purely what your rate can be standpoint.
I just think it's going to be a bigger issue, obviously this year than it has ever in the past. And I guess by the legislature's decision, we'll have either blame or not for a tax increase for special districts. So I'm interested in knowing more sooner. With regard to
Eddie, that falls into play if it's over the compensating rate. Is that right? It's not, I mean, we can't lower it, but they can come in and ask the compensating rate and there's nothing.
Right. Yeah, essentially, yes, if they want to take an increase beyond the compensating rate.
And I think ours are pretty well stuck with the compensating rate, I think, if I remember.
Not all of them. Well, my concern is I would prefer to not take a 4% property tax in this budget. And there's a reason for that, not necessarily because I don't think that we don't need to do it, but because I think once we do it, we have put ourselves in a position where we cannot, then we'll put us in the same position we put ourselves last year, in that if we want to try and put something on the table for a 911 income, we won't be able to. I get it that the 4% tax does not solve the 911 problem, but it at least puts us in a position where we can move toward solving the 911 problem with an ad valorem tax. which is what I think everybody wants to do, but we won't be able to move that way if we put it in this budget.
Steve, I answer on this, but what's the status of our cable franchise agreement? When does that expire? And I think that originally was negotiated when cable TV service was a lot different than what it is today. What's the status of that? And is that
I have not followed up on that one yet.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I know you've been well busy.
I saw you kept us at 250,000 for economic development, and you reported last meeting that there was some concern that the city may be dropping that amount.
Correct.
Any other information on that?
I don't.
Well, I'm glad you're keeping us at 250, and I hope the city stays at 250 for economic development.
Oh, any other comments on any line, anything overall?
What happens next?
What happens next is we are going to introduce the ordinance on the 8th. Then the budget, after introduction, we send it to the Department of Local Government. Last year they took about a week. They had a couple of comments, and then we will adopt this budget on the 22nd of June.
So, and it could be one of those situations where whatever we pass on June 8th, we can't really change unless Department of Local Government agrees to the change.
Weigh in on this, Pam. So ordinarily on any ordinance, when it's introduced, you can make amendments to it between the first and second reading. This one is a little bit awkward because of the Department of Local Government. Now, mostly they do not go in and say, I don't like how much you budgeted for jail linens. They're not going to do that. They have a checklist of all the statutory things you have to budget for, and they check your balances and they make sure it all balances. So I'm very confident that we can make line item changes with not a lot of fuss or muss.
Like Eddie said earlier, I appreciate all the hard work everybody's done. I think all the department heads and elected officials are very cooperative, and we all know what their wish list is, and their wish list is our wish list, and they didn't come and put pressure on us to try to fund those things they knew we couldn't fund, and even your staff and Pam all done really a good job on it. We really appreciate that. I think it's a pretty good budget. I think it's a conservative budget, and I think that once we get through this year, as long as we don't have any more disasters like COVID-19, I think by early next calendar year, I think we'll really have a good outlook on where our revenue is headed.
I really, in order to present you the budget, I really do need direction on whether or not you're going to budget 4% for prop tax. Because if the answer is no, then I got to dig another 190 out of the budget someplace else on the spending side.
When do you need to know? Now?
Well, it would be nice. It doesn't have to be now, but it has to be, by the end of the week. Because if I have to find another 170. We will do that. I wanted to share something with you when we were talking about this last year, is just looking at what I called the competitive set, or those counties that are similar to McCracken County in size and in budget. And among all of those counties, Christian, Franklin, Pike, Campbell, Kenton, Hopkins, Warren, Davis, Callaway, Henderson, and Hardin, we were a lower property taxes than all of those similar sized counties, and not by a little, but by a lot.
Yeah, I remember that well. My biggest concern is doing that and then not being in a position where we can use it to broker a bigger and better deal for the long-term security of our county with a 911, because we will have used it in this budget.
And the only reason I added it in is because you're still in that deficit. You're still structurally imbalanced.
If I have to make a decision today, my decision is not to take the 4%. We can wait till October or November. I might feel different.
Well, but we have to present a balanced budget on July, for July 1.
Right.
And so if the answer is no, I understand, but there'll be 170,000 that will have to come out of the budget.
I think there's a lot of factors taken into consideration. The fact that imposed the insurance tax, the COVID-19 has put a hurt on some people, and I just think we ought to do whatever we can to keep it at where we can, and probably be a decrease in the tax rate. And I think we need to do that if we can, and we need to encourage other agencies to do the same thing, especially the school system, which is what, 55 or 60% of the tax.
At least, yes.
Not of this tax though. Not of this.
Well, of the property tax bill that people receive.
Right.
Where would you make the cut?
I think some of our revenue estimates are probably very conservative. I think we'll be online. And
I wasn't asking, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, but I guess I was asking Steve, you said you would have to find a place to cut. And I guess I was wondering whether you've been thinking about where you would do that.
I'm glad Commissioner Bartleman mentioned that, because I was thinking I'm not going to try to get it on the revenue side. I'm going to get it on the spending side, on the appropriation side. It might come out of paving. We have some contingencies built into the budget. I might nibble away at those a little bit. I hate to do that. We just last year started establishing contingencies. I don't think it's going to be, it won't come from one spot. And remember, I'm not trying to fix 170, 190. We started out today thinking we had to fix about 500,000. So it changes it to now you're going to fix 700,000. And my thought and prejudice going into it would be to find it on the appropriation side.
Well, Steve, maybe it'd be helpful to examine what the 4%, what the county receives out of the 4%, what that would cost the average homeowner for $100,000 value of a home. What would that expense be? I think that's maybe where we are, is that it's a bad time to be looking at increasing the cost of property for our residents. But done that in, I don't remember 12 years or more. And we are among the very lowest of any area, and probably in comparable counties on property tax. It's just that it's a bad time to be looking.
To be assured that the tax rate would not increase. That's kind of what I want to look at when it comes out in November. If what is it, 10 cents now?
Yes.
And if it doesn't rise above 10, I'd be willing to get whatever percentage that would be to keep it the same. But we won't know that till October or November. That's one opinion, others might feel different.
Is that 700,000, that taking consideration the bonds that are gonna get paid off, Steve?
You're muted, Jeff, I think.
I heard Jeff.
Oh, I don't know if Steve heard. You hear Jeff, Steve?
I'm having some audio trouble right now.
I guess what he was asking was, is our debt service payments going to go? Do you have budgeted the payment of some bonds in our debt service payments? And I would assume you do.
Yeah,
They're going away, so that money accounted for in that $700,000 shortfall if we don't take the 4%.
Which one's going away? Which line?
Wasn't the one on the jail paid off at the end of the year? And
Yeah,
that's, go ahead, Pam, but that's already baked into the budget, the number we're going to spend. There's not money hiding in there.
right. That reflects the actual debt payments. And the only thing that would change that is if you paid something off early or you refinance something. Now, the only thing that may be, Steve, I still have $50,000 built in for Genova for that lump sum that probably will go away. So that will be the only thing that I could adjust on there.
that 50,000 a month.
No, total.
But
It's a lump payment. It's on line. Well, I don't know if y'all can see it. It's on line 279 on the spreadsheet. It's principal on note and it's labeled Infinity, which now is really Genova.
But line 602 on our budget, that's your $1.6 million for debt service.
That's not going to change.
That includes, you're already factored in, there's going to be some payoffs.
Yes, that's actual debt payments that will be due in the next fiscal year. Yeah, Steve, that line item, that's one that probably could go away if they pay off the note.
We know they've indicated an interest in doing that, but remains to be seen.
If we were to add a 911 tax consistent with our 411, that we could reduce line 322 by, I guess, section.
All.
Well, it wouldn't generate 706. We can't generate 776,000 with a 4% ad valorem. But we can generate about 200,000 with it.
Correct.
So we could reduce that to 576, thinking that we were going to create a 911 ad valorem tax.
But it nets out the same.
Yeah, the expense is the same. It's not going to change. It's just whether or not you have a revenue stream to pay for some of it.
Right. I mean, I guess in my way, it would be a dedicated stream for 911 for this year, next year, and thereafter, one that we could build on going forward, as opposed to just keeping it through the general budget.
The challenge with that approach is, I think what we're suffering from right now is we're dealing with the same 10 cents per hundred forever. And the budget doesn't remain on the expense side that's static. It moves, it increases. And property tax base does not grow fast enough in new properties to affect our budget that dramatically every year. So if you say I'm going to dedicate the 4% for 911, two things will happen. You'll forever lock in what's available to county operations at 10 cents per hundred, and that additional 4%, while it would grow by little increments every year, I don't even know how long it would take before it paid for 911.
It would take 5 years probably before it would generate 776,000. It would probably take 4 or 5 years. If the fiscal court did the same thing we did.
Correct.
All right, anything else? So we need to be thinking about that 4%. And while we're here, Steve, you remember what was the last time? Was it like 10 or 12 years ago? It's longer than that. The last time we adjusted that, took that 4%.
It was last year.
Oh, well, last year, then before that, I don't know, we ran back 30 years and couldn't find one.
Okay.
With the help of Amy, or help of Kathy Knuckles in the clerk's office.
I think it was 1990 because it was when I graduated law school. I just remember that being the number.
All right, anything else? We're done. For a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, wait.
Motion and second. On favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.